Are we live?
We are live.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We put together a three-part series with the institutions that are all involved in the Milwaukee I-Corps program. So we've got UWM, Marquette, MCW, MSOE, and Concordia. And today we're going to start off. Sorry, my name is Jessica Silvaggi. I'm the Director of Technology Commercialization at the Research Foundation at UWM. And today we want to introduce you to aspects of commercialization. If you have an idea you're thinking about, whether it's for a startup or really just further research, we think customer discovery is crucial and really important to figure out whether there's interest in the market for your idea before you delve too deeply into it. So today we're going to have a talk from Brian Thompson, the president of the Research Foundation and director of our Lubar Entrepreneurship Center. With that, I'll pass it on to Brian Walsh to introduce the next series.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, I'm Brian Walsh with the Center for Technology Commercialization. So we are a state-funded organization that helps small businesses navigate the path to obtaining federal funding for advancing their high-tech ideas and offer a variety of services and counseling. And I am a commercialization consultant with the CTC. And what we're going to be doing in session 2, so after today, our next session is about a month. And what we're going to be doing in that session is we're going to start out with breakout rooms with someone from each of the 5 institutions, the organizations that Jessica mentioned, and to talk briefly, to give an overview about intellectual property licensing, those types of things at those specific institutions. And then we'll reconvene to talk about this federal funding that's available for developing our high-tech ideas, so SBIR and STTR funding, and I'll be leading that and giving a little bit more background about CTC as well. So I will turn it over to Kelpa next.
Hey, thanks, Jessica and Brian.
And you'll have to really yell, Kelpa.
All right, sorry about that. So thanks again. I'm Kalpa Vithalani. I'm Executive Director of Technology Transfer in the Office of Economic Engagement at Marquette. Our office is super excited to collaborate with all the institutions, so CTC, UWM Research Foundation, the Clinical Translational Science Institute, MCW, Concordia, and MSOE on this webinar series. Just wanted to mention our office is in its current structure is a very young office. We're just a little over a year old. And our model is unique in that we bring together corporate engagement, community engagement, and tech transfer all under one roof, essentially to bring together the best of what Marquette has to offer to benefit society. Let me tell you about the last session of the series, which will be on February 11th. And that will be moderated by Sheila Schindler-Ivins, who's an associate professor at Marquette, who's actually in the midst of deciding whether she wants to start a company. And you will hear from other scientists, entrepreneurs, share very candidly about their journey to becoming a business founder, how they made that decision, and how they're currently balancing their roles as researchers and entrepreneurs. So we will hear from Ascending Hearing Technologies, Rapid Radicals, Red Cell Source, and Conovate. And these are all faculty founders from all of the institutions you see represented here. And with that, it is my pleasure to hand this off to Brian Thompson, so we can learn more about how we can increase our chances by understanding the customer.
Thanks, Kelpa. Brian, if you want to hand me
Yep,
presenter role.
Should be there right now.
Okay, just a second here. You have my screen?
Yes, we see it. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me to join. I was actually scrolling through the participant list and pleased to see some names I recognize, including some folks that have been through the I-Corps program. And so my apologies to those of you if I only have so much material and use the same jokes. At any rate, I'm trying to figure out how I get the chat window up to what I'm going to go through this. And as you can all appreciate in the virtual world, we don't have as much feedback as we might like. If you put some questions in the chat, I'll try and notice them along the way or invite my colleagues here to chime in. I'm happy to let you interrupt me if you want, or we can try and batch them at the end. So again, thank you for having me. My name is Brian Thompson. I'm here to talk about the lean launch and customer discovery process. I'd like to say that the lean launch is, if you're thinking about starting a company, it's certainly not the only thing you need to know, but it is definitely something that should be in your toolkit. And so we've been teaching the lean launch process as part of our ICOR, our National Science Foundation Innovation Core program now for over 5 years. It grew out of Silicon Valley, and it came out of the startup world and high-tech startups, but it has been applied much more broadly. The National Science Foundation ICOR program brings it into the academic setting. It's been used in nonprofits and for-profit companies, so it's a really powerful and yet simple framework, and that's what I'm going to tee up for you today. In our ICOR program, I've got colleagues where our ICOR site with the National Science Foundation actually serves UWM, Marquette, MSOE, Concordia, and the Medical College. And we've actually had other people from institutions around the country and the world participate now that we've all gone virtual. In the 5+ years since we've been an ICOR site, we've had 146 teams go through the process. In ICOR, it's about getting out of the building and talking to customers. And those teams have conducted more than 5,000 interviews in total. And the impact that has on informing their work is really significant. And that's really the core of the lean launch and the ICOR. Out of that, there have been 31 companies that formed, and they've raised about $12 million in funding. We don't measure our success only in this way. ICOR is a way to go look at the viability of an idea. And if a team comes through and says, there doesn't seem to be a strong enough fit, or people aren't spending money on this problem, we consider that a win. We'd rather have you figure that out early rather than spend a lot of your time, or heaven forbid, an investor's money before you realize it's not going to work. So ICOR in part is about de-risking things. With that said, there have been several that formed who continue to leverage resources of CTC and other places around the network and moving forward. So we had more than 500 participants. That includes both the teams and the mentors. And so, and I actually noticed it again in the participant list, a few people that have been through in the mentor role. So thank you for joining us and for helping make the program what it is. That's important because there are 500 people that now understand the lean launch approach. And we've had faculty members come back and say that the approach to talking to customers informed their research in ways they wouldn't have expected. So I'm deeply respectful of the academic credentials that many of the colleagues bring to the table at ICOR. We're offering a different perspective, and I think you'll find it's beneficial. From our mentor standpoint, we also have had mentors come from venture investment groups and angel groups and local companies. And many of those mentors who went through first as a mentor actually brought their own company back through the process. So I think it speaks well to the value that they have seen. So ICOR is based in the lean launch approach. Lean gets applied a lot of ways. I'm going to break it down. It's not complicated, but it can be a very powerful approach. And so if we take a bigger business context, there's this concept of the technology adoption curve, where you move from the early adopters to eventually to the early majority and late majority. Jeffrey Moore has a great book, Crossing the Chasm. He talks about the challenges of a company getting to scale. And it's a powerful thing in business schools, really focus or have seized on that in many ways. The problem with that approach is most companies never survive to get there. Most of them die in the early stages. And the ICOR and lean launch approach is focused on that. It really was pioneered by Steve Blank and other colleagues, as I said, coming out of Silicon Valley, but it's been applied much more broadly since then. The idea is really centered around the fact that in the early stages, you're trying to do customer discovery and customer validation, or figuring out whether or not part of the model is going to work or not. And you will probably be wrong about parts of that, and so you have to be prepared to acknowledge that and change the model or pivot. Eventually, once you believe you have a scalable model, you move into a different phase. But the really important point here is that the search phase is different than the execution phase. The the lean launch approach is optimized for helping search for a new model. And in some respects, that's what an entrepreneurial venture is about. Either finding a new customer, a new use for a technology, a new channel, or a new market segment. It can be applied broadly, but it's really about finding something new. And so the lean launch approach is really optimized towards the search process, and accepting that that's what you're going through is one of the key takeaways from the I-Core and the lean launch approach. There's a lot of great resources on this. We've benefited from and stolen from many people in developing our content. There's a great book by Alexander Osterwald that goes through the business model canvas that I'll talk about here today. It's a really engaging, well-illustrated book. And Steve Blank, who I mentioned earlier, helped pioneer this, has made a whole bunch of resources freely available. There's a Udacity course that you can take on the canvas. There are customer discovery videos. And so there's plenty of resources available for this. And I'll also point out that we have a rolling application for our I-Core program, and would welcome a chance to talk to you about it and see if it might be a fit for what you're doing. So lots of great resources available to you. Here's the big idea. And if you ever watched any of the Steve Blank videos, he sort of loves to say, here's the big idea. The big idea behind Lean Launch is that it is a hypothesis-based approach to entrepreneurship. I think this is part of why it resonates pretty well in the academic setting and why the National Science Foundation approached Steve Blank to bring it in here. At this stage, what we have around our business model, it's not about testing the technology, but about testing the business model. What we have are a bunch of untested assumptions, and we need to treat them as such and then figure out which are right and which are wrong. And the lean launch approach is about doing that in a way that doesn't cost you a lot of resources, may cost you some time, but doesn't cost you a lot of capital. So it's a hypothesis-based approach. It has three basic elements. At the center is the business model canvas. This is a simple, short-form way to write down the elements of your business plan. What's the value proposition? Who's the customer? Now, a lot of people may start, or traditionally, you might have started by writing a business plan. And I'm guilty of this myself. And the problem, and you might have a 40-page business plan that's got a lot of great diagrams and go-to-market things and balance sheets and things like that. And the problem with the business plan is when you write it like that, you believe it in a way that you shouldn't. It's hard to break from it once you've written it down and make it all pretty and hand it to an investor. The insight behind the canvas is treat everything as guesses. Put it in a way that you don't feel uncomfortable changing it around, and then and cross things off until you figure out what's going to work. So the business canvas does that. It gives you all the elements that will eventually go into your business plan. And when you go to an investor, you're probably going to want to have it more fully fleshed out. But starting with the business model canvas really frees you up to understand that you're really testing things out in this sort of uncertain world of how your venture can work. Coupled with that is the process of customer discovery. This is not focus groups or Qualtrics surveys. This is a face-to-face process of talking to customers to probe very specific hypotheses. And we'll talk more about how that works in the context of your business model canvas. And the third element is minimum viable product. In the software business, that might be thought of as the 1.0 version, but we think of it as really anything you can do to test an assumption about your business model. In the launch process, we want you to iterate as quickly as you can around that process, accepting that things are wrong, changing, moving on, and investigating new hypotheses until you find what you believe is the core model. So those are the elements of lean launch. And I'm going to break these down for you. There are plenty of tools available online. This is a version of the business model canvas that we use in the Lubar Entrepreneurship Center. There's no shortage of these things online. I'm happy to share this one as well, but you can find these in various formats, electronic and otherwise, if you're interested in sort of digging in on that. I think it's best illustrated by an example. And so I'm going to turn to an example that I cooked up, unintended. I call it home cooked meals. I put it together for some classes that I was teaching. And so we're going to use home cooked meals to look at the business model canvas and how you might approach it. So the idea behind home cooked meals, and fortunately I can't see the video reactions of the folks in the audience. So if you think it's a terrible idea, you won't. I'm not seeing that. So, but here's the idea: home cooked meals is a platform. It's a two-sided platform that connects cooks who might have, say, an extra helping of lasagna with hungry college students who are maybe in their dorm or living off campus and missing those home-cooked meals from mom. So it's a two-sided model, a platform. It couples together with a delivery network and eco-friendly packaging so that helping of lasagna, maybe with a little garlic bread and a salad or something like that, it's picked up in eco-friendly packaging and whisked to our hungry college student in their dorm room so that they can enjoy a little bit of home cooked. It has features, user interface and matching algorithms and billing and these sorts of things. So this is my concept. The thing that I might ask you is, hey, do you like my idea? And that's absolutely the wrong question to ask. And a lot of entrepreneurs do this. You talk to friends and people at cocktail parties and you say, hey, do you like my idea? That's not what you want to do. We want to test assumptions about the model in a more refined and sophisticated way. So let's start with the model canvas. Again, the idea is, the product idea is as I described it to you, but we want to separate that from the business model and build around it a concept of how we might actually make a scalable business model out of this idea for home cooked meals. So the enterprise is home cooked meals. This version, I've iterated on this many times, so I call this the 9.0 version, but I've kicked it around many times and gotten a lot of great feedback from people about how it might work. At the start, we want to think about the value proposition and the customers. And for any business, that's where we like to start. What's the value proposition and who are the customers? And by value proposition, I don't mean the product features. It may have interfaces and matching algorithms and things like that. I mean the pain reducers or the gain enhancers. So what does this do for the customer? Does it alleviate a pain? Does it offer them a gain? The product features support that, but by separating it and thinking about the value propositions independently, it might help guide the best way in how those product features should be developed. So what are the value propositions and who are the customers? If we were in person, we could have more of a dialogue on this, but I'll show you some of the things that I came up with in thinking about this. Customers are the diners. The diner could be a college student, and the value propositions that we might offer that college student would be that it's a healthier meal, perhaps, maybe healthier than pizza. It offers variety, or it saves them money and saves them time, or maybe it reminds them of home. So we might populate some stickies and think about things that we might offer the college student. Now you recall, this is actually a two-sided model. So the other in this model is the cook. So the cook we might consider as well. We could think about the disabled or the elderly, and around each of those diners, there's a universe of people that potentially might be influenced by this. But the other side of the model, as I mentioned, is the cooks, and that cook might be an empty nester. What value do we offer to the cooks? Well, we could offer them the fact that they less waste. Maybe they feel bad about throwing away that extra lasagna since the kids are out of the house. Or maybe it's a little extra income, depending on what the model looks like. Or maybe it's just a sense of satisfaction in cooking for people. Cooking and food are something that brings cultures and families together, and perhaps this empty nester cook misses cooking for the family. So that may offer them a sense of satisfaction that really could be an important value proposition. Different than a feature, but that sense of satisfaction could be a powerful thing to think about as we build our business model. So what we're really looking for then is a connection between specific customers and the specific value propositions. And in the lean launch approach, we call this the product market fit. Which value propositions fit with which customers? And we put it this way because it forms a very easily, or not easily, but a specific set of assumptions that we can test by talking to customers. So you could call it the product market fit, or in the technology space, it might be the problem solution fit if we're thinking about more fundamental technology. For the cooks, it's about maybe less waste, and the value propositions that we offer the diners are different, but they could both be offered by our model. Now, there are other value propositions for this. It could be a sense of nostalgia from meals that you remember your mom or dad or your family cooking. Or it could be a sense of community that comes around the shared experience of food. Or maybe just simply a connection. And that actually might serve both the diners and the cooks. So that's a value proposition that could potentially be important to both. If I look ahead at the other cooks, it could be the empty nesters, or it could be aspiring cooks, or possibly those working in a professional setting. So now I've thought about the customers and the value propositions, and this is always the place to start. I also could think about the customer archetypes. Archetype is sort of the quintessential customer. Not to say that you will only sell to that customer, but it helps to define an archetype that you can tell a story about, because it will help you find them for the customer discovery process. So in the case of the diner and the cook, Diner could be a 22-year-old college student. Maybe it's an engineering student, shares an apartment. His family is more than 100 miles away, say. So the cook could be a 60-year-old female, potentially, or might have 2 kids who are out of the house, likes to cook, and likes to knit. So I don't know if that's important in my business or not, but telling a story about the archetype can help me sort of frame up and think about where I might find these people. And so I really want to focus on the product market fit at the very start. Now, there are things that I will need to fill in. I would want to think about the relationships. In this case, it's probably an ongoing relationship between the diners and the cooks. Maybe they offer feedback. I'd also want to think about the channels. How am I going to get this product to the people? I'm not talking about moving the food. I'm talking about the channels through which I can get people to sign up for my service and deliver this product. And so I could go direct. I might work with a partner organization that is already connected with some of these groups. And so there's different channels I might think about. And these are things that I could explore as well. And so the right side of the business model canvas is really about who wants this thing and why. Who are the customers and what's the value proposition? If we then go to the left side of the canvas, it's really about how does the company or the organization deliver that value? What are the of the organization? Ultimately, someone has to cook food, someone has to deliver the food, and someone has to eat the food. But in fact, the company, as I've conceived of it, doesn't do any of those things. It has a series of activities which it has to do, including organizing the business and developing software and doing customer acquisition. It has to acquire both the diners and the cooks into this network in order to make it work. It has to coordinate the delivery, and maybe it has to do some hosting and maintenance and do the transaction processing. So these are things that the company would do to support the other ideas of what, cooking and eating, which is really what we're trying to deliver in this process. So thinking about the key activities of the company can help us sort of figure out what's all the stuff that has to happen. Underlying the key activities are key resources. Having thought about what I have to do, what's it going to take? It'll probably take talent, and it'll probably take money or capital. And so we could think about, do we need software development talent? Do we need marketing people or business admin? How much capital might it take to create this kind of business? So those are key resources. The other part on the left side of the canvas are key partners. Now, key partners might include someone like a bike messenger group or campus organizations, or maybe groups that affiliate with the elderly. A key partner is not a vendor. A key partner is someone that has sort of a mutual benefit out of the relationship. So if we happen to be shipping things with FedEx, they'd be a vendor. Now, if FedEx located their facility next to us because they wanted to make it easier, then they might be a key partner. So here we've got a list of potential key partners. Again, it could be someone like affiliate groups for the elderly. If I was trying to figure out how do I get to these empty nesters, they might be a key partner because they could see value in it, and and my company could also see value in it. So now I've got the right side of the canvas, who wants this thing and why, and I've got the left side of the canvas about how I might deliver this value. On the bottom, at things like revenue, which underlies the customer, and for the revenue, I could think about different models. How might I pay for this or charge for this thing? Could be a per meal, could be a subscription. There's different ways I might brainstorm to pay for this. At this point, I want to put as many ideas on the canvas as possible because it costs me nothing but whiteboard ink or stickies or bits in this case. Could also be about the price point. What are some comparable prices? If I think about ordering a pizza and what I might tip the driver, okay, that could help me frame up what people might expect to pay for this kind of service. So I could look at price comparables. Ultimately, I'd want to get a picture of how might my sales grow and what would that mean to a revenue model. So that would be underlying the customers. How much money can I make? Underlying the activity side of the business would be the cost question. What are the non-recurring development costs? What would it take to build this software platform? And what kind of cost would I have as this business grew in order to deliver this? Customer acquisition, other things might be key costs. So now I've got a picture of the business. It's just a bunch of guesses, but I treat it as such. And I might stand back and say, what worries me about this business? I've got a lot of worries about this business. I've kicked it a lot, but I tell you, one of the first things I'd want to start with would be the diners. Do they really see a problem with this or not? And I'd want to talk to the cooks. So I'm gonna work on that and put it in this bigger context. Now I've got the business model. I want to go out and do some customer discovery and maybe some MVP. How would I go about that, and where would I start? Well, I would start by maybe looking at the diners and talking to them. And again, there's a lot on the screen, but they would be a place to start. And I would maybe probe that value proposition, figure out whether or not they really are worried about healthy meals. Maybe my engineering college student doesn't really care and is happy to eat pizza all the time. Or I might want to talk to the cooks, whether they saw value in this. Do they miss the kids and do they miss cooking for the kids? Might be something I could test. I could also test things on the cost side. What's the non-recurring to develop a product like this? Or maybe in a two-sided model, I always get worried about customer acquisition and it's often overlooked. How hard is it going to be to recruit people to sign up for my platform, both on the cook side and the diner side? So these are things that I might identify as concerns. And then I want to turn my attention to the second element, which is customer discovery. In our I-Corps program, we really focus heavily in the customer discovery piece. And so we've got a 5-week program where we give you a lot of tips and tricks and suggestions. And I'll give you some summary here and maybe some of the key nuggets in a short overview. So the first thing you want to do is frame up your questions around the risky assumptions of your business. Now, while you're not spending money, it is your time and your time is valuable. So you want to figure out, if you think about the Jenga tower, what's the thing that worries you most about that business? Which element or block, if you pull it out, is going to cause the whole model to collapse? You want to think about what those are and spend your time probing those issues. You can save the other ones for later, because if the main one collapses, that's what's going to kill you first. So you want to frame your discovery using the canvas to test the risky assumptions. You also, you want to talk to as many people around the problem as possible. It could be the purchaser, but it could be influencers and decision makers and stakeholders or gatekeepers. We try and develop as rich a stakeholder map as possible. In fact, in our I-Corps program, we challenge people to do 40 customer interviews in 4 weeks. In the national program, they do 100. So imagine that you go to an investor with an idea. I've got an idea for this platform. Here's how it's going to work. That's one conversation. Now imagine you go to that same investor, say, I've got an idea for this company and this idea. I've talked to 50 customers. Here's what I've learned. Here's how I adapted the model. And here's what I want to suggest to you as the investors. You're going to learn a lot from the process, and you don't have to just talk to the purchaser. You can learn from people all around the problem. And that's part of the challenge and the opportunity in this customer discovery process. The other key thing is, what you don't want to do is pitch your idea. If you go to someone and tell them, I've got this idea I'm working on, it's going to be this two-sided platform, it's going to bring lasagna or pick your ethnic, whatever kind of food, people they love it, it's great. They don't want to hurt your feelings. And if you ask the questions in the wrong way, they're going to just validate you, because again, people see you as an entrepreneur and they want to help you out and they want to move you along. So you don't want to pitch your ideas. Instead, you want to take a more elegant and refined approach to how you ask questions. And the way the key element or takeaway we have on that is from a book called The Mom Test. And I recommend quick, easy read. It costs you $30 on Amazon. It's a thin book, but the value per page is high. The idea behind the Mom Test is you want to ask questions in a way that even your mother couldn't lie to you. If I ask my mom, I say, Mom, I've got this idea for a business. Oh, do you like it? My mom would say, oh, Brian, I love that idea. Actually, there may be two kinds of moms, those that love it and those that don't. But your mother will lie to you. I actually did a podcast called Your Mother Will Lie to You, and sent it to my mom the day after Mother's Day. Luckily, she's a good sport. But that's the idea. Your mother will lie to you. So you want to ask questions in a way that she couldn't. And the way you do that is by asking specific questions about recent past behavior. So, if I've got this idea that my mom's going to use an app, I say, Mom, tell me what apps are on your phone. Have you downloaded any new apps in the last week? Those are specific questions that are harder for your mom or your customer to lie about. Mom, have you ever paid for an app? Oh, never paid for an app. Mom, what did you and Dad do with, what did you have for dinner last night? What did you have for dinner last week? Did you have any leftovers? These are more specific questions, and people don't intentionally lie to you, but they're fuzzy about remembering them. And so this gets to the second big idea around customer discovery. People are optimistic about the future and fuzzy about the past. Would you like to buy this product? Oh, sure, I'd love to buy that product. Have you had this problem? Oh gosh, I have that problem all the time. But ask them about the last day, the last week, the last month, or ask them, is there money in their budget to solve this problem? And you might get a very different answer. So that's the discipline that you want to develop as part of customer discovery. As you approach the interview process, this should not be a hour long in the conference room where you bring your PowerPoints and you show them a deck. Keep it casual. I just need 15 minutes of your time. Can we, I'm imagining a post-COVID world where I could buy you a cup of coffee. So you want to, and keep it conversational. Because if they expect a pitch from you, it's going to be a little bit off-putting. But if you come to them with a genuine desire to learn from them, people want to talk about, and they want to help you. They want to talk about their work and they want to help you. In the customer discovery, we also tell you to always ask 2 questions as you wrap up. Who else should I talk to? Maybe they don't give you any ideas, or maybe they suggest other people around the problem. If you're trying to get a lot of data points, that question can help lead you to more insights and more people. And the other question is, what else should I have asked you? Well, you're asking me about the food and these sorts of things, but I'm having trouble with something else. Might get you nothing, or it could get you a lot of great insights, places where they have a bigger pain point, and you might decide to pivot your business model to a different opportunity. So I'm just giving you a quick highlight of some of the customer discovery things we talk about. Once you get that process down of asking good questions, then you can do something we call follow the money. And it's a little bit surprising, but even in businesses, people will talk about the money. They will talk about their budgets. And you don't want to be disingenuous. You're not trying to, go help their competitor, but people will generally tell you what they're spending on problems. And so in the follow the money, you might want to understand in the organization, what are the sign-off levels and who has to approve a purchase of this type? $5,000 in the university setting is a key threshold. So if pricing at $4,099 kept you from having to go to the next higher level of signature, you'd want to know that. So you might ask that question. That's a very concrete question that people can it's hard to lie about or hard to misremember. You might want to think about the economics of the channel. And you might say, what's the typical markup from wholesale to retail? Or, how does that work? People will generally tell you about that stuff. It's also important to understand sometimes the user and the customer are separate. So think of kids' toys. The user is the child, the customer is the parent. They're the economic buyer. Understanding that and following the money can be important. Healthcare is particularly complicated. You've got the user who's separate from the provider, who's separate from the payer. And so understanding that dynamic and how the money flows can be important. A couple other thoughts, things to ask. How big is the budget for that? Maybe if they don't know, well, maybe you're talking to the wrong person. Or they might tell you that it's a certain number of people on the project. And you could say, those are software engineers. What does that work out to? Like 200 grand a year? And they could say, well, no, it's 250 or 300 or something like that. They'll actually probably help you out and understand how much they're spending on the problem. Is that operating expense or capital? What does a project like that typically cost? How many people on the team? What are you spending on that now? That's a question, if you're selling into a business-to-business setting in particular, that's important. If they don't know, maybe it's not a problem, or maybe you're talking to the wrong person. And so that's important to understand too. So this customer discovery process can really help you follow the money, and that can really inform your business decisions. So turning back to my home cooked meals idea. Let's say I went out and I talked to people and I realized, there's actually another problem with this model, which people usually bring up, food safety. So there's issues, and maybe I decide that my core model has some problems. But along the way, I talked to some of those partner organizations, in particular, the clergy at these religious and faith-based organizations, at temples and synagogues and mosques. And they said, we really see value in that community and connections. So maybe I pivot my model. Maybe the religious and faith-based organizations become my customer. And so I might think about a new customer. Maybe it's the executive director or the clergy or the president of a temple or synagogue. And I would think about the value propositions that I might offer them. I might have to think about other channels to reach them. So these are things that would alter my model. In my initial model, if you look at the activities, you'll see that I envision sort of a complete service business. In this model, maybe I'm just offering a platform. Maybe I sell this to religious and faith-based organizations as a way to connect to their members, where one member would gladly make dinner for another member who may have trouble getting out of the house. And this is a post-COVID kind of idea, but it could offer a different set of values, and it would very much alter my business model in the way I might build this thing. So I could white label and I could offer it to these different organizations. It's a pivot that's easy to make early before I built the whole thing, but if I've already built the app, I'm going to be less willing to make that change. That's the idea behind some customer discovery and some pivoting. The third element is minimum viable product. In the software business, you usually think of this as the 1.0 product. What's the first version I can get into market with? And then you go on to build the other product features as a way to maybe to differentiate price or to build things out that the market needs. In lean launch, we take a step back and we say anything you can do to test an assumption is a minimum viable product test. And it may prove you right or wrong about certain parts of your model. And so we like to think of things that are maybe sneaky little experiments. Not that we're trying to deceive, but we want to be a little clever about how we test things. An example, at a university, student group is trying to figure out where they might put charging stations for people's cell phones. So instead of deploying these things all over campus, they put a clipboard with balloons, and people come up and there was a couple of questions on there. Is your phone charged now? Where are you going? We just spend a few minutes standing here. A sneaky experiment to explore locations around the campus. In the case of home-cooked meals, I don't have to test the whole thing. I could test pieces of this at a time. If I want to see if college students are interested in a particular kind of meal, maybe I go buy a tray of lasagna and I put up some flyers and see if they buy it. So I could test one part of the model, or maybe I could test a customer acquisition piece. I could test the cooks in a different way, and maybe before I go build a whole relational database to run this thing, I could probably run it on an Excel spreadsheet and a telephone until I got to a couple hundred users. And I'd be much better off going to an investor saying, by the way, I've already got a bunch of users using this thing. I need some money to build the app. So you don't have to think about testing the whole model in an MVP. Can you test part of your model? There may be other, here's an example that I stole from the generator folks. There was a group that wanted to make basically the equivalent of a machine for fruit smoothies. And so it would be a kind of a slick product. You drop this thing in and you get a fruit smoothie. So a product like this, it's a consumer product. It's highly engineered. It could cost upwards of $1 million to develop something and tool up to create this sort of thing. Instead, what they did was they went to large office buildings, which they thought were their customers, and they started selling fruit smoothies in the afternoon. Put out a bucket and sold these things. And so they found that sure enough, people were interested in at least having a fruit smoothie in the afternoon. And imagine going to an investor saying, I've got this cool idea, I need $1 million. Or you go to an investor and say, I've got this cool idea. I'm already selling 200 fruit smoothies in this office building and another 500 over here. I need some money to make this product. It's a very different conversation because they've already de-risked key part of their model, which is, does anybody want the fruit smoothie or not? So the MVP piece can test parts of the model. The big ideas. Lean launch, a hypothesis-based approach. Think about what's risky and go test it in clever ways. And from a customer recovery standpoint, people are optimistic about the future. Would you buy my product? Oh, yes, I'd love to buy your product. And they're fuzzy about the past. You want to anchor them down in specific past behaviors. And again, this is one of the things we do in I-Core is coach you on and help guide you through the process of how do you ask those questions. Now, I've shown you an example of this product-based. There's a lot of, this can be applied in a lot of different ways. I noticed some other folks on the phone questions about how you go about that. The thing I want to end on is kind of back to where we started, which is there's this big ecosystem in Milwaukee. We're proud to be part of it in the Research Foundation and the Lubar Entrepreneurship Center. There are a lot of groups that have come together, and pieces of this you can get all around town. And so I think you'll find that if you're exploring an entrepreneurial idea, there's a lot of people that want to help with that. So again, my name is Brian Thompson. The I-Core program has a rolling application process. We run 3 groups per year. And if you're interested in learning more, check into icoremilwaukee.org or reach out to me, and I'd be happy to chat. So with that, I will pause. I'm mindful of the time, and I'm not sure if Brian or Jessica or Kalpa, do we saw anything coming in the chat? But if people have questions, be happy to try and address them.
I'm not, so if you do have questions, feel free to unmute or to enter them in the chat. And actually, Brian, when is your next cohort start?
It will start in the March timeframe. We just finished one up. We're running it entirely virtually. To our surprise, the virtual, number one, it was not a problem for people to conduct interviews. We're now all so comfortable jumping on different web platforms that has not been a problem. And in our last cohort, we actually had teams that included people from Sierra Leone, the Netherlands, and Thailand. And so, surprisingly, it sort of unbundled this process in a way we hadn't expected. So We're accepting applications now. We'll finalize the dates, but it will probably be the March timeframe.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question actually. Based on the experience of these over these years, the 500 that have participated over the years, are there certain aspects that the participants find more challenging to grasp, or are there certain aha moments, or where they catch something that's really made a difference in them advancing their business models?
Great question, and I suppose it kind of varies. There is an aha moment, and actually the process is really helpful to de-risk a business. We've also found that for some graduate students, this process of going to talk to customers is something they don't normally do. And so there's actually a professional development aspect for students. And so oftentimes it's a faculty member that brings along a couple of graduate students who learn from the process and become much more adept at talking about their work and talking to industry. There's also, we've had different approaches to how we teach the customer discovery process. We kind of like for people to have tried it a little bit, and then we come back and we share this mom test structure with them, and there's an aha moment. They're saying, oh my gosh, I've been asking the wrong questions. So probably one of the biggest ahas comes around how you ask questions in a good way.
Any other question?
I'm seeing a question on the fruit smoothies around the regulatory issues. It's a good question. There are things that the I-Corps process is good for and things that it's not. Anything you can Google, you shouldn't be spending your time interviewing customers. So a regulatory question, for example, might be something that you could figure out in a different way, or maybe you get some help from talking to customers. But and similarly, scientific questions are not something you do customer discovery on. Customer discovery is for testing these a little bit more squishy market questions. And then eventually you may want to go on to do focus groups and large scale Qualtrics tests. But at the customer discovery, by doing that at the front end, it may help inform the right questions to ask.
Brian, I was going to say, if you could just talk a little bit about business that might need to deal with public agencies, for example, that are cash-strapped, businesses that might be helping utilities. Have you had those kinds of businesses go through? Because, like you said, as with the healthcare industry, where payers are different, providers are different, et cetera, how have those companies navigated that kind of customer discovery?
I'm trying to think of, well, I know Marquette has a great spin out in the energy monitoring space, if I recall correctly. I think in some respects, the business to business conversations are a little easier. I mean, you have to, takes a little more networking to get to these individuals. But if you can get to a VP of engineering, and we do have a tightly coupled network in Milwaukee. And so through organizations like the Water Equipment and Policy Center and other networks, I think you would find that even in the business context, people are willing to, and business and governmental context, people are willing to have those conversations and be fairly open about that. I also see a question here. I think it regards the question about how you conduct these interviews. And one of the questions that often comes up is, do we need an IRB or an institutional review board to conduct these interviews? In general, the guidance we've gotten from NSF, and of course I encourage you to check with your own IRB and be respectful of the situation. But in general, this is not intended to be publishable work. And so in general, you don't need an IRB to ask customer discovery questions. So that's one point about I-Corps. Another point to looking ahead to one of your upcoming lectures is the question about intellectual property. As you'll hear probably next time, you always want to be careful with intellectual property, not to have a public disclosure that might compromise your rights. In I-Corps, we generally tell people that's not a problem because you shouldn't be talking about your idea. You should be talking about the customer needs. And so you have an idea and it may be patentable and you may want to keep that quiet and again, talk to your tech transfer organization about that. But if you're doing customer discovery, you can generally sidestep that by just asking about, are they spending money on the problem now?
What about when you present to the class? Can you keep, any intellectual property quiet? Because I know you have kind of class presentations.
We do, and I think while I firmly believe you can trust the discretion of your participants. And it really is a cohort process, and you learn as much from other people and mentors in the room as you can. We don't have people sign non-disclosures. So we tell people, look, if you have an enabling aspect, don't talk about those details. That doesn't stop them, though, from saying, I talked to 40 customers. I started out thinking this was the problem, and now I think this is the problem. You can still, it does not hamper, I don't believe, the presentation. But we caution people. Let's just consider that this might be considered public disclosure, so limit what you talk about. And that generally hasn't been a problem. Now, occasionally you'll get a customer who drills into you and says, well, what are you working on? I want to hear about that. And then you have to push back and say, I'm part of this I-Corps process, and they tell us to focus on your problems and not talk too much about what we're doing. So if you don't mind, I'll just ask you some more about your work. So we've had people that have had a little pushback from the interviewees, but with the right coaching, they can generally sidestep that kind of thing.
Brian, I know you didn't get into the details of the actual program and how it works, but since we have a little time, maybe just go into the team setup, the entrepreneurial lead, the academic lead.
Sure, thank you. We run 3 cohorts a year. And again, I also want to point out that you'll find elements of this lean launch programming in CTC programs, ID Advance, and others, but we focus on the customer discovery piece. The teams generally include, we ask for 2 team members. It's kind of a team sport, and you need to work with each other and help each other. So typically in the National Science Foundation model, there is an academic lead, usually a funded PI, and an entrepreneurial lead, sometimes a postdoc or someone, maybe a graduate student, someone that might actually take this thing and go with it. But at a minimum, we ask for 2 team members, and we also have some student teams, and we're a little bit flexible on those 2 roles. We bring in a 3rd person. We match each team with a mentor. That mentor might have some domain expertise, but really their job is to enforce the discipline. If you come back after week 1 and say, my customer wants this, the mentor's job is to say, is that what you think? Or is that what 10 customers told you? And if not, go out and talk to them. So the mentor helps enforce the discipline and also may help you make some connections and help brainstorm with you about how to get to people. So we typically have 10 teams with 10 mentors, and some teams are larger. They bring in, we had a nursing team with 10 participants in the last group. 10 teams that work together over the course of 5 Monday nights. So the way the flow of the process is, we start with a pre-meeting with each team in the week, in the lead-up week, and we drill in on your business model canvas and tee up the whole process. We meet individually with each team, and then we have 5 Monday nights in a row. So there's 4 intervening weeks, and we challenge you to do 40 customer interviews in that time. That can be a lot, but it's not that it has to be 40-hour-long meetings. It could be 15 minutes at a conference or 20 minutes on a Zoom call just to ask some very targeted questions. Each week, the team comes back. We ask them to report out on what they've learned. And we're conducting this now on Zoom. And so we keep those sessions to about 90 minutes. They're dynamic. We do a little bit of group content. We push you into breakout groups to work as your teams. We encourage some crosstalk between the mentors and the teams because the teams learn as much from each other as they do from us. And then the last night is a lessons learned presentation. This is what Jessica referred to. It's not meant to be a pitch. There's a place for pitching, but this isn't it. In the I-Corps process, we want you to come in and say, I came in thinking this was my customer. I learned this, and either I'm continuing on this pathway or I had to pivot my model. And so we focus on, do you understand the process, which is the first step, and did you learn from it in ways that inform your business? And that's what we ask customers, as people to report on it. So again, we have a rolling application, and also it's a great opportunity for mentors. I'm looking down the list, and several of the people, other participants, have been mentors in the program, and I think they would agree with the fact that they learn a lot from the process in their own business that they then take back and apply in their own business. So thank you for that question, Kalba.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm trying to see if there's other things I might pick up out of the chat. So the question about, I think the question, Margaret, you're asking sort of around students and participation. I think it's a great way for students to learn a new set of skills, and they also can provide a little bit of capacity for getting out to interview people. So I mentioned that nursing team, where there were 10 students, and it was undergraduates, PhD nursing students, and a whole range of people. So to some extent, it gives you a little bit more capacity to go out and reach a lot of people. But you don't want to spread it around too thin, because we want to make sure that the the person who's driving the business idea is there to hear from the customers. So I'd be a little nervous if a professor wanted to send their students to go validate their idea might not be right, or it might not work in the way they conceived of it. So I'd want to make sure that the key decision maker was part of the team. Margaret, I'm not sure if that answered the nature of your question. I'm just trying to catch up on the chat. I guess Jessica or Brian or Calpa, is there anything else from the chat that we might want to address here in the time that remains?
Yeah, so I'm not even seeing the things that you're seeing in the chat. So
Yeah,
Okay.
I can't see it either.
It might be.
The presenter who's seeing these?
Maybe so. Let's see.
Yeah, so I'm getting the questions and I'm passing them on to Brian because
got
I'm
it.
technically the host.
That's why I thought you just had a lot of great questions, Margaret.
I should have not said that then.
So I think, well, Jessica made a comment, I think, that even a faculty without a startup idea could benefit from this. And thank you for bringing that up, because this has come up in some of our conversations with our research leadership at the university. There's a lot to learn about the marketplace. And so even if you don't have a startup in mind, understanding the application for your technology can really help the way you write proposals. And we have one faculty member that did the national I-Corps program and said he never wrote proposals the same way. And so if you're certainly for an SBIR or an STTR grant, it can be critical data to add credibility to your grant. But even for traditional basic science grants, the ability to say, I've talked to VPs of engineering at such and such type water companies, and they are spending money on the problem to detect a certain thing, can add great credibility to a basic science grant. So I think it's a great point that it can be available it's beneficial to not just people that want to think about a startup, but people with an idea that want to understand how it's applied.
That's actually a really good segue into what we're to next week's presentation. Where we'll be talking about SBIR and STTR funding and the kinds of things they're looking for in the programs, et cetera. But we have at CTC, we've interviewed a program manager from National Science Foundation who validated that, right? Who said that when that's mentioned in a proposal, that does have some value, to the reviewers and to the process. So, yes, great point.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, second, that, third, that I was on an NIH panel twice now for SBIR, STTR, and when people didn't mention any, that was a negative comment I saw. And then when they did do customer discovery, it was always in there, obviously, as a very positive comment that they did their homework.
I see a more tactical question about students in the I-Corps participation, and maybe I see a more refined version. The question is, do they need to be part of the company? And I would say no. We're trying. I suggest encourage people to try this early in the process, and you certainly don't want to take inappropriate advantage of students to help you with your company. But I think generally, if you've got graduate students, they benefit from talking to customers. They may benefit from opportunities to get employment opportunities, but at a minimum, this skill set of getting out of the lab and talking to customers in a professional way about their business. And we give them a bit of a script. But I would say it's not typical that a student is already an employee in the company. It's probably the exception. Usually it's just a graduate student, and being respectful of not wanting to take advantage of students inappropriately. I think it's a good thing if you can involve them.
Or undergrads too, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, and we have some undergrad student teams as well. We tend to focus on the faculty researchers, but occasionally we have room for a community team, and we've had nonprofits that have gone through the process, and so it really enriches the experience for everybody.
Okay, looks like we're down to the last minute or two here. So, anybody, any last thoughts? Brian, any last thoughts? Or, again, I'll just remind everybody that we have. The next session is January 14th, but any other final thoughts from anyone?
On my side, again, thank you for having me. We've had the honor and pleasure of working with a lot of people around this program, and I want to thank those on the call that have helped support this. So thank you for that. I also have a saying that I seldom turn down a cup of coffee. In the COVID world, I seldom turn down a meeting. So if you want to talk about your idea or learn about an I-Corps, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah,
thank you very much for doing this. And as you said, there's there's a good network going on here in Wisconsin, and so we're often sending people that in that direction or referring, and it's all good. It all helps strengthen things. So we really appreciate it.
The last thing I would add is, hey, thanks so much, Brian, Jessica, and Brian, Margaret. To those who are attending, thank you as well for joining us. We would really appreciate if you could help us spread the word about the February and March sessions, because we'd really like more of your colleagues to take advantage of this wonderful education and hopefully participate in some of this programming that can be very helpful if you're beginning to think about starting a business, or even just thinking about what is this all about.
Well said. Okay. Well, thank you everyone if there's nothing else, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will look for you on the January 14th.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thanks,
See ya.
bye.